The Midnight Manuscript in the center of Harrington City, between the granite courthouse and the Old Town Square, stands a building that seems untouched by time. The Harrington City Library. With its tall arched windows, oak-paneled reading rooms, and endless shelves, it has been the city's quiet soul for more than a century. It is a place where generations have studied for exams, researched family histories, and found comfort in the turning of a page. A hidden treasure within, but beyond the public reading rooms and children's section, there is a part of the library few have ever seen. Down a narrow hallway, behind a locked oak door, lies the Special Collections Archive, a climate-controlled room holding rare maps, centuries-old manuscripts, and one-of-a-kind letters from authors long gone. In 1989, the pride of this archive was a simple leather-bound book locked inside a glass display case. It was the unpublished final manuscript of Elias North, a celebrated novelist whose works had shaped American literature. Elias North. The city's literary legend Elias North was more than just an author here. He had been a local resident, known for writing his novels at a corner table in the old Riverside Cafe. When he passed away in 1975, his last work remained unseen by the public until his family donated it to the Harrington City Library, under one condition: it would never leave the archive. A symbol of trust, the manuscript was more than paper and ink. It was a symbol of trust between North's family and the city. Displayed only during literary festivals, it drew visitors from across the country. Scholars came to study its handwritten pages, its ink smudges, its margin notes revealing the author's private thoughts. The calm before the mystery. For years, the manuscript sat untouched behind the glass, watched over by staff who treated it like a priceless treasure. And then, one spring morning in 1989, a librarian unlocked the display case and found nothing inside. The glass was unbroken. The lock was intact. The room had been secured all night. Yet the city's most prized possession had simply vanished. Before we can understand why the disappearance of the manuscript shook Harrington City, we need to know the man who wrote it and why his last work was unlike anything else he had ever created. The life of Elias North. Elias North was born in 1908, the son of a schoolteacher and a shipyard carpenter. He grew up in Harrington City, spending afternoons reading by the riverside and evenings listening to sailors tell stories in the harbor taverns. By his early 20s, North had published short stories in national magazines, each one capturing the small-town rhythms of life in New England. But it was his debut novel, The Glass Horizon, published in 1934, that put him on the literary map. A voice for the everyday North style was simple, yet filled with deep emotion. He wrote about ordinary people, lighthouse keepers, fishermen, shop clerks, and made their struggles and joys feel universal. Over the next 4 decades, he became one of the most respected voices in American literature. 3 of his novels won national awards. One was adapted into an Oscar-nominated film. The final years, by the early 1970s, North had largely retreated from public life. He was seen less often at literary events, and more frequently at that same corner table in the Riverside Cafe, writing quietly in longhand on yellow paper. Friends later said he spoke of one last story, a book he wanted to finish before his health gave out. The Unfinished Gift. When Elias North passed away in 1975, his family found the completed manuscript in his study. It was untitled, bound in worn leather covers, its 312 pages filled in his careful script. The family decided not to publish it immediately. Instead, they donated it to the Harrington City Library in 1977 with a promise: the book would be kept safe, accessible only for study, never sold, never taken from the city. Why it was irreplaceable? This wasn't just any manuscript. It was the only copy in existence. There was no carbon duplicate, no typed draft. If anything happened to it, Elias North's last words to the world would be gone forever. April 3rd, 1989. A Monday morning in Harrington City. The spring air was crisp, and the early sunlight spilled through the tall library windows. It began as any other day, but by noon, the library would be at the center of a mystery that has never been solved. Opening the library at 8:15 a. Head librarian Margaret Alden arrived to open the doors. She'd worked at Harrington City Library for over 30 years and knew every creak in the floorboards, every shelf, every scent of paper and polish. As she passed through the main reading room, she glanced toward the Special Collections hallway. The heavy oak door was locked, its brass handle gleaming as usual. Routine inspection at 9. Amnianjos. As part of the daily routine, Margaret unlocked the Special Collections archive to check temperature and humidity levels in the climate-controlled room. The archive was cool and still, rows of glass cases holding rare books and manuscripts. She walked past medieval maps, first-edition novels, and into the far corner to the case that held Elias North's manuscript. The empty display. At first, she thought the light inside the case had failed. The manuscript wasn't visible. She crouched down, looked again, and saw only the pale green felt lining where the leather-bound volume should have been. The glass was intact. The lock was in place. There was no sign of forced entry. The first response, Margaret immediately closed the archive, locking the door behind her, and called library security. Within minutes, staff confirmed that no one had signed into the archive since the previous Friday afternoon, and the weekend had been quiet, with the archive locked the entire time. The unanswerable question: the manuscript had vanished from a locked case in a locked room, inside a building with staff present at all times, and not a single person had seen anything unusual. If there was one thing everyone agreed on, it was that the disappearance of Elias North's manuscript should have been impossible. The Special Collections Archive was one of the most secure rooms in the building, and in 1989, that meant more than just a sturdy lock. The archive security. The archive was located at the far end of a narrow hallway, accessible only to staff with a brass key issued by the library director. There were only 6 keys in existence, each kept in a numbered slot in the director's locked desk drawer at the end of every day. The door to the archive was reinforced oak, its hinges bolted from the inside. The single window was sealed shut, and thick iron bars were set into the stone exterior. The display case inside, the manuscript's display case, was custom-built, tempered glass, a double lock requiring both a standard key and a small cylindrical tool, and a pressure sensor that would trigger a light in the head librarian's office if the case was opened outside of scheduled hours. According to the records, the sensor never went off during the weekend before the disappearance. The locked room problem. In mystery stories, a locked room crime usually means one thing: someone on the inside had to be involved. That was the theory circulating quietly among the staff, even before the police arrived. Yet, in interviews, every librarian and archivist swore they hadn't entered the archive since Friday's scheduled closing. The police inspection. When Harrington City Police inspected the room, they found no tool marks on the locks, no sign of tampering with the hinges or window bars, and no damage to the display case. If the manuscript had been stolen, it was done without breaking anything and without triggering a single alarm. A vanishing without a trace. The locked door, the untouched locks, the sealed window, it all pointed to an impossible theft. But if it wasn't stolen, then where had the manuscript gone? When a priceless manuscript disappears from a locked case, inside a locked room, inside a guarded building, the first question investigators ask is, who had the keys? The list of 6. The Harrington City Library Director provided police with a list of the 6 people who had authorized access to the Special Collections Archive. Margaret Alden, head librarian, who discovered the manuscript missing. Philip Cross, assistant director, responsible for building security. Laura Bennett, senior archivist, known for her meticulous record-keeping. Thomas Keene, rare books specialist and longtime staff member. Howard Lyle, city records officer, with access for document transfers. Henry Voss, retired library custodian, still contracted for occasional repairs. Interviews begin. Detectives began by interviewing each key holder separately. Margaret Alden was shaken, her voice steady but low as she recounted finding the empty display. She insisted she had not opened the case since the Friday before. Philip Cross, calm and formal, said he had been at a city council budget meeting all Monday morning and hadn't been inside the archive in over a week. The archivist's note. Laura Bennett, the senior archivist, produced her weekend log showing that the temperature and humidity sensors in the archive had remained stable from Friday to Monday, a sign that the room had likely not been opened in that time. Unusual behavior. Thomas Keene, the rare book specialist, seemed oddly defensive, quick to point out that he never worked weekends, and disliked being anywhere near the archive after hours. Police noted his sharp tone, but found no immediate contradiction in his alibi. Howard Lyle, the city records officer, said he hadn't visited the library in over 2 months. Henry Voss, a part-time custodian, claimed he hadn't been inside the archive in more than a year. No breakthrough. Yet every person on the list had an explanation. No one admitted to even approaching the display case that weekend. And without signs of forced entry, investigators were left with a troubling thought. If it wasn't one of these 6, then who else could have gotten in? For more than 3 decades, the case of the missing Elias North manuscript sat unsolved. It became part of the library's lore, something whispered about during tours of the Special Collections Wing. And then, in the spring of 2022, a young library archivist named Rachel Lynn was organizing an unused card catalog in a basement storeroom when she made a discovery that would reopen the mystery. The forgotten drawer. The old card catalog was heavy, its oak drawers stiff from years of disuse. Most of the drawers were filled with dusty index cards, many handwritten in fading ink. But in the very last drawer, Rachel found a stack of cards that didn't match the rest. Tucked between North ELIS poems and North ELIA short stories was a single cream-colored envelope. No postage, no address. Only 2 words on the front, written in elegant cursive, for the keeper inside the envelope. Inside was a folded slip of heavy paper. The handwriting was instantly recognizable to anyone who had studied the manuscript. It looked like Elias North's. The note read, "Some words are meant to be hidden. Wait for the moonless night. I will come." And at the bottom, a date, April 5th, 1989, 2 days after the manuscript was last seen. The shock wave. Rachel reported the find immediately to the head librarian. Within hours, the library board contacted the Harrington City Police Department. The handwriting was sent to a forensic document examiner, who confirmed it was highly consistent with North's known writing. Impossible questions. If Elias North had died in 1975, how could he have written a note dated 1989? And what did the moonless night mean? Was it a metaphor? Or a literal clue to where the manuscript had gone? The note found in the basement card catalog was the first tangible clue in over 30 years. If authentic, it might explain what happened to Elias North's final work, or at least point to where it went. The examination room at the Harrington City Police Department, the note was placed under a high-intensity examination lamp. Forensic document specialist Dr. Evelyn Carr compared it to samples from the manuscript itself and to letters North had written in the 1960s and early 70s. Her initial conclusion: the handwriting style, letter formations, and ink flow were highly consistent with Elias North's known work. But the ink told a different story. The ink's secret chemical testing revealed that the ink was manufactured in the late 1980s, years after North's death in 1975. This meant one of two things. Someone had been forging his handwriting, or someone who knew his style intimately had copied it nearly perfectly. A closer look. Dr. Carr then examined the paper fibers under magnification. She found tiny flecks of blue, residue from carbon paper, suggesting the note might have been typed or traced before being written over by hand. Even more curious was the faint indentation on the reverse side, a partial outline of numbers. When enhanced, the numbers read, 42719 theories begin. Was it a date? A code? A reference to a page or section in the library's catalog? Rachel Lynn, the archivist who found the note, suspected it might be a call number, the unique label assigned to each book in the library's collection. But when she searched the system, no such number was active. The strange sequence of numbers 42719 didn't match any book in the library's modern catalog. But Rachel Lynn decided to check the old system, the one stored in a dusty cabinet in the sub-basement. The old card system decades before computers, Harrington City Library had logged every book by hand. Each call number referred not only to a shelf, but sometimes to a specific room or cabinet, places that no longer appeared on modern maps of the building. When Rachel located the index card for 42719, her breath caught. The entry reads simply, Stairwell, South Wing, Storage Access. A place forgotten, the South Wing was part of the library's oldest section. Built in 1894 and closed to the public since the 1950s, it had been sealed during a renovation when new reading rooms were added. Most staff assumed the old stairwell had been removed entirely. With the director's permission, Rachel and maintenance supervisor Daniel Holt used a master key to open a narrow maintenance door behind a row of storage shelves. Down into the past, behind the door was a narrow spiral staircase, the iron steps worn smooth from decades of use. Dust coated every surface, and the air was cool, with the faint smell of paper and salt, odd for a building miles from the ocean. The staircase descended 2 full flights before ending at another door, this one with a rusted padlock. When Daniel forced it open, the hinges groaned as if they hadn't moved in half a century. The hidden room inside was a small circular room with stone walls. Old wooden crates lined the edges, and in the center stood a table covered in yellowed sheets of paper. A single brass desk lamp, disconnected, sat on top. Rachel noticed something else. One of the crates bore a faded stencil in block letters. Property of Harrington City Library Archive. As Rachel and Daniel prepared to inventory the crates in the hidden room, news of the discovery began to circulate quietly among long-serving staff, and one former employee decided it was finally time to speak. The retired guard Samuel Price had been a night security guard at the library in the late 1980s. By 2022, he was in his 70s, living in a small apartment on the city's north side. When he heard about the hidden stairwell, he contacted the head librarian and asked to meet in person. He brought with him a battered notebook, its pages filled with short, precise entries, his personal shift logs from over 30 years earlier. A strange night, Samuel explained that on the night of Sunday, April 2, 1989, the evening before the manuscript was discovered missing, he had been making his usual rounds on the 3rd floor. At around 11:20 p.m., he heard a faint metallic sound, like a latch clicking, coming from above him. The only thing directly above that section of the building was the south wing roof, which was accessible only through the maintenance area near the old stairwell. The rooftop figure. When Samuel stepped out onto the roof to investigate, he saw a figure in a dark coat standing near the edge by the old ventilation shaft. The figure was holding something flat and rectangular, wrapped in cloth. Before Samuel could call out, the person slipped behind the ventilation housing, and by the time he reached that spot, the roof was empty. The note in the log. Samuel admitted he hadn't reported the incident at the time. In his logbook for that night, he wrote only 4 words. Roof check, nothing found. When asked why, he sighed and said, "I didn't want trouble. And if it was staff moving things around, I figured it wasn't my place to interfere." The hidden room beneath the south wing was a time capsule. Dust lay thick on the crates, and the air smelled faintly of old leather and ink. Rachel and Daniel began carefully unpacking each box, labeling the contents before moving them upstairs for cleaning. The unexpected contents, most of the crates held forgotten library materials, archival newspapers, out-of-print reference books, and bound city records from the early 1900s. The Sunday night memory Gerald remembered April 2nd, 1989, vividly. He had been called in to fix a leaking radiator in the basement. Around 11:15 p.m., as he wheeled his tool cart down the south wing corridor, he heard muffled voices coming from behind the maintenance door, the same one that led to the hidden stairwell Rachel had recently uncovered. Two people through the narrow glass pane. Gerald saw Philip Cross standing inside the doorway, holding a large cloth bundle in both arms. Beside him was a woman he didn't recognize, carrying what looked like a flat wooden box. Neither saw him, and Gerald, thinking it was above his pay grade, kept walking without saying a word. Why he stayed silent when the news broke the next day that the manuscript was missing? Gerald said he immediately suspected the bundle he'd seen might have been it. But with no proof, and fearing he might lose his job, he decided to keep it to himself. "I told myself someone else would speak up," he admitted to Rachel. But no one ever did. The unanswered question, if Philip Cross had been moving the manuscript that night, was it an inside job? Or was he helping someone else hide it for safekeeping? With the testimony of Gerald Munro and the old ledger entry, Rachel finally had enough to sketch a possible sequence of events. It wouldn't be proof in a courtroom, but it could explain how the impossible disappearance happened. The working theory on Sunday night, April 2nd, 1989, Philip Cross signed out a master key, officially noting maintenance in the ledger to avoid suspicion. Instead of maintenance work, he used the key to access the south wing and the old stairwell, a route few staff knew existed. He wasn't alone. The unidentified woman Gerald had seen may have been an accomplice, possibly someone with a reason to move the manuscript quietly. The south wing route, by using the hidden stairwell, Cross could bypass the main archive doors entirely. If the manuscript had been removed from the display case earlier that weekend, it could have been stored in the hidden room temporarily. That night, Cross and the woman carried it up to the roof, where Samuel Price later spotted them near the ventilation shaft. From there, it could have been lowered to a waiting vehicle in the alley below, without ever passing through the main library entrance. The note as a decoy, the note found in the card catalog decades later, with its cryptic moonless night message, may have been planted afterward to confuse investigators, or to make it appear that someone connected to Elias North himself was involved. The handwriting, painstakingly forged, suggested whoever wrote it had access to the manuscript for study before it vanished. Lingering doubts, but Rachel still had questions. Why had the manuscript never surfaced for sale? Why hide it for decades instead of profiting from it? And who exactly was the woman in the south wing that night? Without answers, the theory remained just that, a theory. In late 2023, nearly a year after Rachel Lynn discovered the note in the card catalog, an unexpected phone call came from the estate lawyer of a recently deceased art and antiques dealer. Among the dealer's personal effects was a dusty box labeled Library, Harrington City. Inside that box was an old auction catalog, the 1991 auction. The catalog was from a private sale held in Boston in the spring of 1991, 2 years after the manuscript vanished. Most of the lots were antiques, rare books, and nautical maps. But one listing caught Rachel's eye. Lot 42, leather-bound volume, untitled, handwritten in ink, believed to be unpublished fiction. Providence, private estate, New England. No author's name was listed, and the photograph was in black and white, but even blurred. The size and binding looked almost identical to Elias North's final manuscript. The missing records, the catalog didn't say who bought Lot 42. Auction houses kept records, but after more than 30 years, many had been lost or destroyed. Rachel contacted the firm that had run the sale, only to learn it had closed in the early 2000s. A handwritten note at the back of the catalog. Rachel found a faint pencil marking next to Lot 42, 3 initials, MAC, and a number that might have been a bidding price. Were those the initials of the buyer? Or just the auction house's shorthand for a category? Without confirmation, it was another frustrating dead end. But one more clue, tucked between 2 catalog pages, was a business card. Cream-colored, embossed in gold. It read, Miriam A. Carver, Rare Manuscripts and Private Collections. And on the back, in neat handwriting, keep safe until delivery, April. The name on the business card, Miriam A. Carver, wasn't familiar to anyone at Harrington City Library. But a little research revealed she had been a prominent rare manuscripts broker in the 1980s and 90s, working mainly with private collectors in the northeastern United States. Tracking Miriam Carver had passed away in 2004, but her business records, as part of her estate, were donated to a small university library in Maine. Rachel contacted the university archivist, who agreed to search their files. A week later, the archivist called back with something remarkable. An invoice from April 1991 for the delivery of an untitled leather-bound manuscript to a client in Vermont. The client's name had been blacked out with marker, but faintly visible through the ink was a capital C, followed by Ross. The familiar name to Rachel. The connection was instant. Philip Cross, the assistant library director from 1989, the man in Gerald Munro's testimony, and the last known person to access the South Wing at fateful night. It seemed he had arranged the sale through Miriam Carver, carefully disguising the manuscript's identity to avoid suspicion. Where it ended up, the Vermont client's identity remained unclear, but property records showed the estate had been sold in the late 1990s to an out-of-state buyer, and its contents dispersed at a private estate sale, a sale with no surviving records. If the manuscript was among those contents, it could now be anywhere in the world, sitting on a collector's shelf, unknown to the public. Rachel's closing thoughts in a quiet interview recorded for the library archives. Rachel reflected on the long trail of clues. It's possible the manuscript is lost forever, but it's also possible it's out there, waiting for someone who recognizes what it is, to bring it back home. And so, the mystery of the Midnight Manuscript remains unsolved, a story locked not in a display case, but in the passage of time itself.